Right, what I'm trying to do with this limb is fill in the missing bits of wood to get it bulked out to an even thickness such that I can then build a frame around it out of ply. It won't be that ply, but you'll end up with a shoot through hole there. So that first bit, that used to be the arrow cut out, cut out for the arrow shelf. I've got a bit of wood glued in there. That is now flat and parallel such that the tip of the limb is about the right distance off the flat surface. That's going to be bulked out further. Now for this side I've got a bit of hickory roughed out, and again I've measured it so that when that's all glued up, that will put the limb tip over there about the right distance off the flat surface. So I'll get that glued on. I'm doing a similar thing to the other limb where I've got one side cheek already glued on. But if I get the various bits glued, then I can jig them up and maybe grind them or rasp them flat on the belt sander to try and get it so that once it's all glued up with the plywood around it, the tips and the limbs are in line, because obviously if they're not in line then the whole thing's going to be no good to man nor beast. But I can obviously get one end glued up first and then try and perhaps put the adjustments on the other end. But I'll get this glued up to start with. Leave it overnight. That's the problem with gluing, you always end up having to wait a long time for everything. Another thing I've been experimenting with is trying to make thin bamboo shafts. Now, some flight arrows are made with like split cane, which would be 6 sections all glued up to give you a hexagonal cross section, which must be an incredibly fiddly job. But I've seen them done with 4 sections, and that's what this is. And originally I tried it, did a little tryout, cutting some fairly small bamboo shaft in 4. And of course, doing that I lost the width of the saw blade, which then resulted in a smaller shaft with no central pith. But the chances of sanding up 2 faces at 90 degrees is almost minimum. But then I had a brainwave. Just saw the shaft in half, so you got a bit like that, where it's been sawn in half. Grind it flat on the belt sander. Put the 2 halves back together. It's now smaller in that direction because you've lost the thickness of the saw cut plus what you've taken off sanding. You then glue the 2 halves back together and then saw it in the other direction at 90 degrees to it, and the result is this. I don't know if you can see that, if that's going to focus. It's like a square section, and that's pretty small. It's probably too small for a flight arrow. This was just a tryout. I mean, I've got, going across the diagonal, I've got about 6mm. The glue's not had 24 hours yet, so I'm not going to flex it. But that might be an interesting way of getting a relatively stiff, relatively light arrow. So that's got the blocks glued up on the other limb. Obviously they'll need cutting down and trimming. And it's got this side on this limb and the little cutout, what was the arrow pass, filled in. There'll be another block there, but it's slow and steady progress. I've got some plywood glued up that will become the sides of the box, if you like, and they'll protrude forward for the grip at the front. It's all a bit tryout. I might just try it with cardboard first, mock it up with, I've got some thick card. Then I might try it with the ply. It's only going to be, well, that was a £40 bow, and I'll probably have it so the limbs can be adjusted fore and aft to increase the draw weight. So I'll probably be looking at a £50. I may need more thickness there, but that'd probably do. It's not like it's going to be a £100 bow, but I mean, it is a prototype, a sort of tryout, but I do want it to shoot a decent distance. I certainly want to get over 300 yards. It'd be nice if I get past my PB. Be nice if I get out even further, but for the real, you know, the real shot that's hopefully going to get over 400, I'll be looking at making new limbs, a new bow and the rest of it, or maybe using the Osage flight bow, which is over here somewhere. That's the fella, the Osage flight bow with an overdraw built into it. But I think to get over the 400 yards I'll probably need something shooting through a window or keyhole or whatever you want to call it. Next morning, and my glue blocks are dry, so I've been trying to grind this one flat on the belt sander in the correct alignment. So what I'm working on is an overall width here, which will be the sight window, and I'm going for 44mm because it's a nice number divisible by 2. Well, if that's going to be 44mm wide, then from there to the centre line should be 22. Therefore, from the surface here to the tip should be 22. Now I've got like a sacrificial block of wood here that's been sanded up to a nice 90-degree face. So I clamp the belly of the bow to that, and I put it on the belt sander and press down hard on that end. Well, of course the sacrificial block here will also get ground to some extent, but it's a way of trying to get this flat. You can see I'm almost there, and that will then become my reference point. But as it gets ground down, I have to keep checking everything. But problem with a bow is you haven't got any straight edges anywhere. Nothing's straight, you've got no reference point, it's all hanging in the air. So it's all a bit weird. In the meantime, my little tryout bit of arrow shaft's looking surprisingly good for a tryout. And that's what it started out as. So you can see it's been considerably shrunk, and it's fairly stiff. I'm pleasantly surprised, and it's a thinner diameter than I would have imagined. I think it's about 6.5, something like that. Yeah, on the old mandrolic one, about 5.5. Pretty good. Be interesting to see how that goes out of a bow. So I'm nice and busy. Lots of progress. So I've already ground this one flat, so what I've got to do, finish that side, then get that side to match. I might even clamp the limb up and do that on my little mini milling machine. Similarly, this side now wants its cheek glued on there. Then once I've got them all to the 44mm or whatever, then I can work on the rest of the structure. All good fun. There, having got this side flat and lined up with the tip, I've now just got it jigged up in my little mini mill, and I'll mill that down to the total 44mm thickness across there. I can't guarantee the limb will be dead centre in it, but it'll be close enough to act as a reference to make the other limb the same. Just doing the first cut to make sure there's nothing sticking out too much. Then I'll go down and take bigger bites out of it. I've got this mill off eBay. It was slightly damaged. I converted it to a belt drive myself with a video of how I did that on the YouTube channel somewhere. It's not something I use very often, but it's quite handy for something like this when you're after a degree of precision. Could always do it by hand. Most things that can be done with power tools can also be done by hand. After all, that's how they made the first power tools. I had my air shield face mask thing on while I was doing that because it was a bit dusty, and hopefully that should now be about 44mm thick. Right, my first cut was miles out and that looks very asymmetric, but the proof of the pudding will be if I clamp it here, how high is the tip? Look. That's about the middle of the tip going one way, which is about 22. Turn it over and measure it again, and it's pretty similar. So regardless of how asymmetric it looks here, it looks like we're pretty good at the tip. And that was one of the problems with this bow. The limbs had sort of moved and twisted and gone sideways, and of course that's a problem with a bow, especially a reflex deflex bow. You haven't really got anything to use as a reference point. But anyhow, ignore what that looks like. Let's just see how wide it is. Here we go, close enough to 44. 44.5, that'll give us a little bit of leeway to fiddle and fettle. I can worry about how much I cut away here, but I want to sort of blend it in. I want to leave, the more wood I've got to mount everything else, the better. So I'll leave it like that for now. But that's one limb done. Now I want to get another block of wood glued up on this one, and then I'll sort of be getting close to putting it together. That's the next block glued on, so tomorrow morning I'll be pretty much ready to start tidying things up and looking at the bits to assemble the two limbs together. In the meantime, to tidy up my arrow shaft, I just made that little jig up out of a bit of scrap timber and some 120 grit. Ran the arrow shaft through it, clamped one end in the lathe with all that masking tape. It looks surprisingly good. I think that might have the makings of a nice flight arrow. Anyway, you can see what a busy chap I am. I've got some cleaning to do as well. Let's go and have a nice cup of tea.